writing is a way to immortalize a memory. If you look at the history of fictional written word, the earliest story that we can recall and have accounts for it, like in clay tablets, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. It's the story of a man named Gilgamesh who encounters someone in a fight named Enkidu. This is a really condensed version. Enkidu dies, and he goes on an adventure to try and find the secret of immortality. He doesn't end up gaining immortality from the gods, but in his death learns that stories are told of him over the ages, and he's remembered through the stories of his adventure. And this happens all the way through the history of literature, all the way up to now in the postmodern, where we have Harry Potter that's going to live on for hundreds upon hundreds of years. Writing also has a lot of health benefits. The first one that people immediately jump to is stress. It's throughout the day you encounter lots of problems. It leads to backseated emotions, and taking some time at the end of each day to write about those things helps bring closure to the stress and relieve some of the backseated emotions and find conclusions to the problems easier. Your brain gets very cluttered throughout the day. If you think about each task that you do as a tab that you've opened in Chrome, by the end of the day, it starts to look kind of like this, which leads to crashes, slower thinking. It's best just to write things out and help get more organized. And when you think about an idea, it's just that. It's an idea. But once you put it to paper, it's not an idea anymore. It's a plan. It's something tangible that you've given birth to. You're now able to say, hey, I have this. It's physical. Look at this. And it's the first step in making it into a reality. Memory retention is what I think the biggest benefit from writing is. If you've ever woken up from a dream and then 5 minutes later tried to recall it, you can equate it to like holding water in your hand. It starts to drip out from the bottom, and you can no longer, the details get fuzzy. Writing each day helps you remember things, even like dreams. Like I found that writing, and I've had a really good dream, and I woke up and wrote down the details. And then when I went back later and looked at it, I was like, oh, yes. And also this and this. So it's definitely good for memory retention. Stephen King has a book that he called On Writing. I think this is the best nonfiction book on how to write that's out there, well above everybody else's. And one chapter, he talks about the writer's toolbox. The writer's toolbox is like all the tools that you have for writing. And a beginner's toolbox might have 3 or 4 layers, and more advanced writers have multiple layers. We're going to look at just a beginner's toolbox in 3 basic layers. The first layer is your top layer. It's filled with vocabulary and grammar. People get very nervous about vocabulary. They go over their writing and they try and replace words with other words thinking, oh, this looks nicer. So they'll take a word like moody and replace it with tumultuous or tempestuous. And it leads to your sentences sounding like it's the difference between I need to use the restroom versus I need to relieve my bowels. One sounds more natural and has better flow, and the other doesn't. Best case scenario is to just use whatever word first comes to mind. Same thing with sentences. You don't need to make your sentences 50 words long. They don't look impressive, and oftentimes they just feel like run-ons. He said, she said, they went are all just as good sentences, 2-word sentences. And he makes a very, probably my favorite quote in the entire chapter is, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. Adverbs are things that writers commonly overuse. It's like salt in a dish. A little bit is good because it adds flavor, but if you oversalt the dish, you've ruined it. It makes your paragraphs feel too verbose. The other thing grammar-wise that people get very intimidated with is the comma. And there's one good rule for a comma. It's anytime that there would be a natural pause in the dialogue or the flow of the sentence, just put a comma. It's very easy. The middle layer of your writing toolbox is the form. If you open a book and you look at how the paragraphs sort of string together, or the stanzas for poetry, you'll see that it sort of gives you like a guide map. He says that paragraphs are almost as important for how they look as for what they say. They're maps of intent, and this is true. If you open up Marcel Proust's Swann's Way, you know what you're getting into when you open it. There are other smaller things you can do too for stylizing, like the apostrophe S, putting an apostrophe S on the end of words, even if they end with S. So Mark's and Jess's with an apostrophe S is going to be more natural to a reader than Jess's with an S apostrophe. The best way to see this in action is just to sit down and start writing. You'll see that your words form paragraphs, and the paragraphs form chapters all on their own. They create their own style naturally. The bottom layer of the toolbox is the one that I feel is the most important. It's your inspirations and the books that you've read. If you carry around a notepad for a week, and every time something happens, like you feel a little shake as a train passes by and you think an earthquake strikes a city, and you write that down, like the earthquake strikes a city and the police have to come through and relieve the chaos, or your power flickers for a minute and you think, a strain of mutated DNA gets out and rats eat it, and they're in the sewers and they chew up all the power lines, and now the city's suffering from a blackout with mutated rats. I mean, it happens as easy as that. And if you do it for a week and look back, you're like, oh, I have lots of things I can write about. Every book that you read is inspiration to add. Books are someone else's perspective on the world. And by reading those books, you've gained a small collection of perspective, fiction or nonfiction. Everything that someone writes is how they see things. So reading improves your vocabulary and improves the way you write. And it's why it's the most important. And at the end here, I've just added a list of books that one might consider adding to their toolbox. They're what I think are best in genre, so to speak.